Welcome back, everybody. My name is EKWB, and if you watched my last video, you'll remember I installed a water cooling kit in my computer to cool my CPU. If you haven't watched my previous video, please feel free to take a look. The link for the video is down in the description. So now that I have a water cooling system for my CPU, the next logical step is to add a water cooling block to my GPU. So that's what we're here to do today. My GPU is a Vega 56 Strix edition from Asus, and I will be adding a water block to it here made by EKWB, so the same brand of water cooling that I added for my CPU. So real quick before we get started, I'm going to go ahead and show you what I got for I'm going to go ahead and show you what I got in the water block kit for my GPU. So the first thing we have right here on top is some cooling pads that are going to go on top of the VRMs to keep those cool and create good contact with the actual water block itself to add additional cooling for them. Next, we have the hardware, which are a bunch of tiny little screws, some plugs for the water block, as you'll see in a minute while we need those, and some thermal compound to apply to the actual GPU itself. Instructions, always important, especially for me today and for anybody else that might be doing this for the first time or the 100th time. Every water block can be a little bit different, and they do a really good job of explaining exactly how to go about installing this. So we'll definitely be needing those. And then the star of our show here today is the water block itself. So again, this is one specifically designed, you can even see the Strix branding down here. It is specifically designed for my Strix edition Vega 56. So you can see here it's got a nice big nickel plated copper block for cooling. I've got my RGB for adapter so that I can get the nice lights going through here. And on the top here we have, and you can see right through these, that's why we have the caps, because depending on which direction you want the water to flow, you will need to block through the side or you're going to have a leak. So this is what we're going to be installing today. Next step is to get the GPU out of my case. So first things first, as I said before, we have to get our GPU out of our case. So in my previous video, again, I installed some CPU water cooling on my CPU, which means, as you'll see in just a moment, I have water tubes running in front of my GPU. It's maybe a little bit tough to see, so I apologize for that. But here, let me get this around. So you see we have these going here right in front of it. So that's obviously going to make it a little bit difficult to get this out. So I think what I'm going to do is, this is only attached by 4 screws. So I'm going to take this out, remove our GPU, and then we'll come back and we will eventually have to empty this loop and get this added to the loop. So obviously these tubes are going to have to tie in my GPU some way. That's one of the advantages of having the soft tubing over the hard tubing, is I can just take this out without having to actually empty my loop. Okay, so this is now free to move around. Unfortunately, it's not quite as free as I was hoping, as the power is still plugged into the motherboard to actually run the pump. But this should give us plenty of room to be able to get our GPU out. Next, take these guys out. These screws are what actually hold the GPU into the case. And then from here, we need to, there is a retaining clip right here that you need to click. It's kind of difficult to push, I'm going to use my screwdriver. So push that back, and that will actually allow you to pull it out. And then, and unplug the power cables. Those are always important. And there it is. There's our Strix Vega 56 graphics card, completely out of the case. And the next step will be to put this guy, well, in this case it's actually going to go this way. Boop, just like that. So let's get started. Alright, so according to our handy dandy instructions here, first step will be to remove our back plate. So we have 6 screws to remove from the back side, and then we'll flip it over, and we have more screws to remove on the front. So let's remove the screws. Alright, with those removed, let's consult our instructions here and see what is next. Wow. That came off really easy. So next, we will remove power cables here. Excuse me, the fan cables and the RGB cables. And there we have our graphics card with the stock cooler removed. And here we have our stock cooler. Boom. And this is what we're going to be replacing today. Now we have a few more screws we have to remove on the front here that will allow us to remove this brace, or this frame here, and it's going to also allow us to finish removing our back plate. So let's continue. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 screws on there. Oh, then we got 4 more here in the middle. Oh. Well, the instructions don't say to remove those, so I'm not going to be removing those. But we do have 2 screws on the face plate here. I'll swing that around so you can kind of see what I'm doing. So you got 2 screws right here. There we go. Now this, assuming you actually remove the screws completely, which looks like I didn't quite finish unscrewing a couple of these, come right off. There we go. And here we have our completely naked. Oh, did our back plate come off now? No, it looks like we got to remove these 4 screws here to remove the back plate entirely. And the hardest part for me doing any of these projects is always trying to keep track of all the screws. There we are, back plate removed. So now that we have our back plate and cooler removed, next step is to clean off our actual GPU chip. Get all the old thermal paste off. Then we will reapply thermal paste using the thermal paste included in our kit, which is right here in this bag. And then we'll add the thermal strips, thermal pads that are included in our kit to our power delivery to help cool those. And then we get to apply our water block. So let's get a move on. So to clean the actual GPU off, we're going to use a paper towel and our isopropyl alcohol. The alcohol will help break up, or break down I should say, the actual paste itself, which will help remove it a little bit easier. And of course the paper towel will be used to clean it all away. So you might notice, now that I have the top of it cleaned off, there is a little bit of thermal paste here around the sides. So to get that, I'm actually going to use a Q-tip and, again, some more alcohol. So I like to pour a little bit out into the cap, give me a spot that I can kind of dip my Q-tip in. And then we'll just rub around. Important thing is here, don't press too hard. You don't want to damage any of the chips, and you also don't want to you don't want the Q-tip cotton to get caught up and left behind. Alright, you don't have to get it absolutely perfect. A little bit of thermal paste left behind isn't going to hurt anything. But now that I got it pretty well cleaned up around the sides, I'm just going to give it one more. Alright, so there we go. Nice and cleaned off. So you don't have to get absolutely everything out. There's probably going to be a little bit of thermal paste left in between some of these components here. That's perfectly fine. Just get as much off as you can, and make sure, of course, the top of the GPU itself is as clean as you can get it. That's the most important part to get clean, because we don't want any of that old thermal paste to prevent proper contact between the GPU and our new water block. So before we apply the thermal pads, we're also going to want to clean off our VRMs over here with just a little bit of rubbing alcohol, again, to make sure there's no residue, no adhesive or anything left behind from the old thermal pads. Okay, so now that we have those nice and cleaned off, I'm actually going to hit the entire PCB with just a little bit of compressed air, just in case anything was left behind by my Q-tips or my paper towels. So let's get some compressed air. Okay, so let's hit it with a little compressed air. All right, that looks good to me. Can't get much better than that. So now, with everything completely deassembled, cleaned off, it's time to start our assembly process. So let's do it. As you're following your instructions and applying these pads, just make sure that you're using the right thickness, because that will obviously affect how well the GPU water block will make contact. In my case, the thicker pad is labeled number 2, which is what I have here, the 1mm. And we have to cover the VRMs here, and there's 2 also over here on the side. They did give us, it looks like, a little bit extra of our 1mm thick thermal pads. They did not give us any extra of our 0.5mm thermal pads. So I'm hoping I can maybe trim a little off at the end here to make enough to cover these as well. So first I'm going to start and measure here. And if you press down a little bit on your pad, you'll actually be able to make a nice little crease mark, and I'm just going to trim that extra off. There is also a protective film on both sides of the thermal pad, so make sure you remove that before you apply it. And there we are. And again, there is a film on either side, so you will have to take this top off. I'm going to leave it on just to protect it, because I want it to have proper contact with our block once we apply it. Next, we take our thinner thermal pad, and I'm going to do the same thing here. Get it lined up, apply just a little bit of pressure down here on the end. Trim off the extra. Take off the protective film on the bottom. Line it up and apply just a little bit of pressure, make sure it's firmly stuck down. Man, that's going to be tight. So again, I think there was probably supposed to be a second strip of our 1mm thick pad, or excuse me, 0.5mm thick pad, but it is not in here. So holy cow, I just realized I did this completely backwards. Yep, I did this backwards. The thinner 0.5mm is supposed to actually be on the VRMs themselves, and the thicker pad is supposed to be on our, what is it called? They did the memory IC. I'm not sure what exactly that stands for. But I'm gonna get these swapped around. Again, that's why I was stressing earlier, to make sure that you double check your instructions. Which I did. I double checked my work, and that's how I figured out I did it the wrong way. Alright, with the thermal pads in the correct positions on these ones, I can move on to our other ones here. So looks like from the leftover I can get our VRMs covered with that, and I have plenty of our 1mm thick to cover our memory chips. And this process is exactly the same. Measure, cut, remove our protective sheeting, apply, and again I have just enough left over of our
1/2 millimeter thickness to cover the top of our VRMs here. And there we are. Beautiful. So now that I have them applied, there is still this blue is actually a protective film on the top as well. So now I'm going to actually go through, pull this off. Well, that was way harder than it should have been. But we now have all of our protective coating, plastic coating off for thermal pads. And thermal pads are properly applied. Next is to apply our thermal compound to our GPU. According to our instructions here, they want us to make an X on the primary part of the actual GPU, and then just a strip or line across the two. These are actually two memory modules. So, let's follow the instructions. Okay, and I actually added a couple more dots just to make sure I have appropriate coverage, because the difference between a GPU and a CPU is the CPU on the top actually has a heat spreader. That's what you're actually applying your thermal compound to. With the GPU, you do not. You're applying it directly to the GPU chip itself, so you really want to make sure you have appropriate coverage. And because we have non-conductive thermal compound, there's no issue if it gets spread out as you apply your water block. So a little tip that I learned from watching some other people do this on YouTube is to actually use the box that came with it to help you apply your water block. Reason being is because of this big plate here, after you apply and you flip over to apply the screws to screw it all down, it gives you a spot here where you can hang it off the end. So, with that, let's apply our water block. Okay, now we'll flip it over. And like I said before, now we have some height here so we can let this plate hang off. Alright, now we get to use these screws that they provided, as well as these little plastic clear washers, which are probably going to be tough for you to see, which are also tough for me to pick up off this table. But make sure with every screw that you put in that you are using a plastic washer, as these are necessary to prevent any shorts from happening between the PCB and your screws. So I'm actually going to start in the middle here and make sure I can get everything around the actual GPU tightened down. So it looks like I might have actually used the wrong screw here. 2.5 times 4, 5 times 4, yep. So I used the wrong screw. Alright, so you'll notice I already went through and double checked the tightness on these, but I'm going to triple check. So I really want to make sure these are good and tight, and actually that one was a little bit loose. Make sure that we got good, proper contact on all of our components. Not the least of which our GPU here right in the middle. Everything is good and tight. And they said to double check, make sure we have good contact. Looks like we do. We got really good contact all the way around here. Yeah, I'm definitely happy with that. Alright, so there it is. GPU water block installed on a Vega 56 Strix Edition Asus graphics card. And again, this is a water block from EK. I don't know why there's a screw hole here that they don't show in the instructions, but we got 16 screws, we got an extra screw and an extra washer. I'm putting it in there. It's right by the GPU itself. I can't see why that wouldn't be a good idea, so I'm doing it. So now the next steps are to decide how we're gonna run our water cooling loop through here. Again, as I mentioned before, you can see right through these two holes. So we gotta make sure when we're tying this into our loop, we need to decide how we're gonna run. And I actually have a pretty good idea how I'm gonna do that anyways. And wherever you don't have an adapter for the water tubing, you need to put these covers in to prevent leaks. So that's what we're gonna be doing next. So thank you all for joining me. Oh yeah, can't forget to remove this. But all in all, this went a lot smoother than I thought. Again, I've never installed a water block on a GPU before. As a matter of fact, I've never even taken a cooler off of a GPU. So I'm really happy with how this all turned out. Look forward to getting this sucker installed, getting it tied into my current water cooling loop, and testing it out, seeing what we can do. There we go. Oh yeah, can't leave that on there. So there we go. Completely installed, ready to go water block. I really appreciate you guys joining me today. If you guys have any feedback, make sure to leave it down in the comments. And if you like what you saw here today, please feel free to drop a like and subscribe to get notifications for any new videos as they come out.